My name is Dick Dorworth. My full name is Richard Owen Dorworth, and we are in the Sun Valley Lodge in March 23rd, 2022, and that's where we are.
Okay, so we're back in 1948.
Okay, in 1948 my family was living in Lake Tahoe, South Shore, and I was going to a school there. And 10 years old, and one of my friends in school, Doug Gaynor, and both Doug and his sister Cecil Gaynor became really good ski racers and were, old friends. And Doug introduced me to skiing, and he got me a pair of skis to use and took me up on what is now just south of Tahoe Valley there. There's a street that goes out towards Myers, and I skied there for the first time. And first day I skied, I came home to my parents and said, I got to have some skis. And they bought them for me. They couldn't afford them, but they bought me skis, and so I started skiing there at South Shore. And then there was a little rope tow on the run that now goes up to Heavenly Valley. There's a road that goes up there, and I'm spacing the name of it, but there was a little rope tow there, and we skied there, and there was a rope tow at Myers, which is right near South Shore. And then my first real skiing was at a place called White Hills, which is at the junction of Spooner's Summit, but if you go around from South Shore to North Shore, Tahoe, and right where the junction is to go down to Carson City, there was a T-bar there, and that's where I learned my most skiing, first skiing.
So as you grew up in your formative years, what was your first ski race?
The first ski races were at White Hills, which was the Spooner's Summit thing. And then the first race I won, where I finally was a racer, was at Tahoe City, and they had some races there at a place called Grand Labakan, which is right at Tahoe City. Was an old ski area, and we used to do 4 events there. And in those days, you were a jumper and a cross-country skier and slalom and downhill. And so that was the 4 event, and I was I can't remember exactly, but I think it was the Far West Ski Association. I was the 4 event champion in 1950 for the 12 years old people. Yeah.
So how did it accelerate into getting to, well, did you go on the road with racing?
Well, yes. And then when I was, I ski raced around the Tahoe area until high school, and then my family moved back to Reno, where I was born. And we lived in Reno, and I was on the Reno High School ski team and the Nevada ski team. And so we would race all around the far west, which was Mammoth Mountain, and we'd go to on the east side of the Sierra or the west side of the Sierra over Donner Summit. There were races at Cisco Grove. And then in 1953, they used to have here in Sun Valley, it's the first time I came to Sun Valley, it was called the Western States American Legion races. And all the Western states had sent teams here, and there were 4 boys and 2 girls on each team. And I was on the Nevada team, and so we came here and raced in 1953, and that was my introduction to Sun Valley, and I knew this was my place. When I was a little boy, I went, this is it. Yeah, so it was good.
So can you characterize, how far is it from Reno to, say, Mammoth, or from Reno to Sun Valley? I mean, how long would you be on a road trip for that?
Reno to Mammoth is about 4 hours, 5 hours, something like that. Reno to Sun Valley, it depends on your state of mind and the car you're driving. Now it takes me 2 days, but we used to do it in about 10 hours, in big drive, fast drive. We used to drive really fast. We thought that was fun, yeah, which it was, yeah.
So did you actually drive all the way to Aspen? And how long a trip is that?
That's a really long trip. That's about 1,000 miles, and we used to do that in one shot, just because we could, yeah. And we'd drive all night and all day, and drive really fast.
So what was that first race in Aspen for you?
First race in Aspen for me was in 1956. Is that right? The Roach Cup. Yeah, I went to the Roach Cup in '56. Yeah, and for that race, I drove there with a woman, a very good racer from Truckee named Babette Howeisen, and Babette was older than me, and she kind of was a mentor of sorts, and she took me out there, and we raced in the Roach, and Babette placed or maybe even won the Roach. I can't remember. Yeah.
So now, Aspen had a really important place in your life. How did that all unfold for you?
Well, I went there for the Roach, and then in the winter of '56-'57, I graduated from high school, and I went to college for 1 semester, and then left and went to Aspen and lived. And I lived there with Ron Funk and Tony Perry, and we got a little apartment and lived there and trained, and Paul Ryan and McKinnon and a whole bunch of people who became lifelong friends were there, and we trained hard. Tony Seiler spent the winter there that year, and that was really fun to see him. And we trained and raced there all year, and then went on the circuit. And then I went back to school the next year, and let's see. And then I was in Aspen several times after that for races, but I never lived there again until I don't think I lived there again until when was it? Till the 80s or something. But I was there a lot, in and out. And
were you ever involved with the ski school there?
Yes, and I was director of the Aspen Mountain Ski School from 1988 to 1992. Yeah, and that was a really good job. That was fun. I learned a lot there, and it was the most money I'd ever made doing anything at that time. So it was really fun, also.
So did you know Friedel at that time?
I knew Friedel. I knew Friedel. I can't remember exactly when I met him, but in the '50s sometimes, And I knew Friedel Pfeiffer. Yeah, and he was a really good guy. I liked him very much, and of course I admired his skiing. And I didn't know as much about life in the world as I do now, but he was impressive, and I respected him and liked him, and he was a good one. Yeah.
Now he had left Sun Valley by the time you met him.
Yeah, I don't think I met him here. I think I met him in Aspen. I don't recall exactly, but I think I didn't meet him until he was in Aspen. He wasn't here when I first came. He might have been here in '53, but I don't remember. I wouldn't have met him then, So.
And Buttermilk was really his.
His domain. Yeah, and he was a huge influence on all of Aspen. Yeah.
So, what was your first trip to Europe?
I first went to Europe in 1964, and I went to Europe because the year before we had done the speed runs in Portillo, and I had the world record. And the people in Italy who put on the Chilometro Lanciato, they wanted me to come over and defend my record against their boys. So they paid my way over, and I had a free trip to Europe. And they got a hold of me and said, I think the telegram said something like, "We want you to come to the Chilometro Lanciato in '64 and defend your title, and what are your terms?" So I went to Europe, and I went for a month. That was my plan, to go there for a month and train and run the speed run. And I wound up staying a year and a half in Europe. I sold my plane ticket home and stayed in Europe for a year and a half. Yeah, it was great. It's what I wanted to do. And Europe was beautiful. Yeah.
Were you, maybe you can characterize your physical health after trying to defend that title?
Yes, trying to defend that title, I fell down at 101 miles an hour and broke my right leg and did some things to my back that took years to be okay, and bruised my body beyond belief. And so my physical health after that fall was not perfect. And yeah, so I was beat up pretty bad, but it was okay. All things are relative. Yeah.
And yet you still can characterize your time over there as a spectacular year.
Spectacular. And one of the things out of that fall is I had the fall, and they took me to a hospital in Milan, I think. I can't remember, somewhere. And they put a cast on my leg, and it hurt, And so the old Swiss skier, Willy Forer, was there. And Willie came up to me, and he was another really beautiful human being. And Willie said, "These Italians are not good at medical things, so get out of here and go somewhere else and have them look at your leg." So I had friends in the American Army in Heidelberg, so I went there, and my friend got me into the doctors there, and they cut the cast off. It was on too tight, and they cut the cast off and said if I'd kept the cast on, I might have lost my leg. Yeah, it was really tight. I don't know. So
A near thing.
a near thing, yeah.
I guess I'm curious. You were mentioning Innsbruck before,
Yeah.
and was that on that trip?
Well, when I went to Europe to speed ski, by then we did the speed runs in Portillo on head skis, but in the next year in the United States, I got so that I was skiing on Kneissl skis, and Franz Kneissel's brother-in-law, his name was Ernesto Saska, and he got me on Kneissl skis, so I was on Kneissls. So when I decided to go to Europe to speed ski, I went to Kufstein, and Kneissl kept really good care of me and was really good to me. And so I lived in Kufstein and worked in the Kneissl factory for about 4 or 5 months while I was recovering from my broken leg and all that stuff, yeah. And Kneissl was a wonderful man to me, yeah.
You had a, let's just call it a colorful history with the U.S. ski team. How would you, would you like to reflect on that?
Yes, I would like to reflect on that. The U.S. ski team is, like all institutions, an institution, and it's full of imperfections. And so when I was racing, this was pre-FIS points and everything, and so when you would go to a race, the people in charge of the race would seat you wherever they wanted. And it took me years to figure out exactly what was going on, because I was just a ski racer. I didn't know, but my personality and the fact that at one point I'd broken my leg and lost a couple years of ski racing, so I was older than some of the racers. Anyway, the ski team didn't like me. I mean, to sum up, or some people in the ski team didn't like me. And so I always battled with the ski team from early age. And much of it was my own fault. Had I known how to be a little more polite, and I didn't. And a lot of it was not my own fault. And so I was always at odds with the ski team. Even later, when I went to work for them, I was a coach for the U.S. ski team, and I was at odds with them then too. So it's ingrained. And yeah.
Well, picking up on that kind of maverick, maybe you can tell us the story of going to Europe with Warren Miller and
Oh, okay. Well, let's see, that would have been in the mid-'70s, and I had known Warren from childhood. You know, his annual movie in Reno was a big event, and I knew him and liked him, and we always got along and everything. We didn't agree on many, many things politically and socially, but we always liked each other and chatted and everything. And so in the mid-'70s, I had grown a beard down to here, and I had hair down to here, and I was not your standard, traditional American, all-American boy. And I was living in Bishop and kind of adrift. And I got a message from Warren that he was putting together this film trip to Europe. And the skiers were going to be Pat Bauman and John Reveal and me. And he wanted me to go with him. And I hadn't seen Warren in person in a couple of years. So in those days you wrote letters, there was no email and all that stuff. So I wrote him a letter and I said, Warren, I'd love to go with you, and I will. And he paid very good. He paid all my expenses and good money, more money than I could make to do this. So it was a good deal. And I said, I'd love to go and I will go, but you need to know that I have a beard to here and hair to here. And that violated everything about Warren Miller, and I knew it. So I didn't hear from him for quite a while, and I went, well, okay, I get it. And then I got a letter from him, and he said, well, I've always maintained that it's what's in a man's head, not what's on it, that counts, so let's go. And I've always loved Warren for that. It was really, I went, here's a man who can disagree with you, but be okay with it. Yeah. We need more like that in the world. Yeah.
Well, marching to a different drummer, maybe you can tell us about the Fun Hogs.
Well, the Fun Hogs were a great group of people, and 4 of us are still alive, and we're all good friends. And that happened because Doug Tompkins, who built North Face and later Esprit, was an old friend, and he had this idea. He wanted to be a filmmaker and make a film on the kind of like the Endless Summer, only it was about climbing. And so he wanted to drive from California to Patagonia and climb Fitzroy, this mountain there. And he put this film thing together, and but I was not a climber then. I'd never climbed. And so I was going to go and be the good skier, because we'd ski on the way down there. And then I could haul loads on the climb, but I wasn't going to climb. And so Lito Tejada Flores, who is now my publisher, he's published not that version, but a different version of that book, and Yvonne Chenard, who owns Patagonia, And Patagonia is named after our trip, and the insignia on the Patagonia gear is Fitzroy. And so Yvonne and Lito and Doug and I left California in a van, 6540 Econoline van, and drove down. And in Peru we picked up Chris Jones, who was down there climbing, and we went down to Fitzroy and we spent 2 months climbing Fitzroy. But between the time the trip was put together and the time we left, I had started climbing, and so I wanted to go on the climb, and it took me a while, but between the time we left Ventura, where Chenard lived, and we got down there, I had convinced Chenard that I needed to go on the climb, and Chenard was kind of the leader of the climbing group, and so he took me, and I got to climb Fitzroy with very little experience. It was a great event. Yeah.
So was your days in Yosemite after that?
No, I went to Yosemite just before that, and what had happened is while I was that winter before, I was teaching skiing in Squaw Valley with Lito. And there was a guy there named Jim Bridwell, who's one of the all-time famous climbers. And he and I became party friends. We liked to party and ski and do all that stuff, did many things. And so at one point, I let Jim attend my classes for free because he wanted to learn more about skiing. He's a good skier too. And at one point he said, hey, if you ever want to learn how to climb, come to Yosemite and I'll pay you back for this, because I let him in all my classes. And I said, I don't care about that, no. And then a guy came to Squaw Valley, one of the world's greatest climbers in history, a guy named Dougal Haston, a Scotsman. And he came there, and he and I became drinking buddies too. And he became really a lifelong friend. And one time we were chatting over drinks at midnight. He said, would you like to learn to climb? And I said, sure. But I did it just because I liked hanging out with Dougal. And so the first day I ever climbed, I went, this is what I've been missing since I quit ski racing. I knew it right away. I just went, oh, this is what I want to do. And so I climbed with Dougal for about a week around Tahoe. And then I went to Yosemite and I spent a month with Bridwell. And so I didn't know it at that time, but those were some of the best climbers in history, and they gave me my basic lessons. And then later in climbing, as a young ski racer, I used to ski race with Royal Robbins, who's also one of the great climbers. And Royal and I were roommates at the 1953 Junior National Championships, so I knew Royal. So I had an in to climbing that most people don't get, and it was really good. It was a gift.
Did you climb in Europe at all?
I climbed in Europe a little bit. I climbed at Fontainebleau, which is outside of Paris, and it's a bouldering area more than anything. And I have skied in Europe a lot, but I haven't climbed in Europe, no. Yeah.
Well, it's off. It's no longer on your bucket list.
No. Nothing in climbing's on my bucket list. Yeah.
So when did you start writing?
I was an only child, even though I have a brother now, same parents, who's 20 years younger than me, same parents, But I grew up an only child. And at Tahoe in those days, we were pretty isolated. So my mother always made sure I had the best books. So I grew up as a young reader. And so at a young age, I don't know, 12, 13, I knew I wanted to write. I wanted to do what those guys did that I was reading about. And so I went to high school and took all the journalism and English classes that I could. And then I went to the University of Nevada and started out as a journalism major and then switched to an English major with a journalism minor. But I started writing in high school, and I started keeping journals in 1958, and I've kept journals ever since. And so I mean, that's what I was going to do. So essentially, the only things I ever really wanted to do was write and ski and climb, and the rest of it's been whatever. Yeah.
Well, that explains how your books, I mean, how you can reach back 40 years and remember what you did through a period of time.
Those journals are invaluable, yeah. And I've gone back to them, and I have a suitcase in Bozeman. It weighs about 100 pounds, and it's full of journals. And I go back and read through them sometimes, and it's amazing. I go, it's like a different person. I go, I hardly remember that, or that's me, but it's my writing. I wrote it. Yeah. So they've been very helpful in my life. Yeah, as a writer. Yeah.
So was it skiing that got you first published? Were you first published through ski content?
No, I did not. I published. I'm trying to think if I can't remember if I got something published. I think I got a few things published in high school in the school paper, but I can't remember. And then in college, I wrote a few things for the literary journal, and then I had a column in the college newspaper, and so I started getting published that way. And then for a while I had a column in this would have been I can't remember, in the early 60s, when I was, no, it was the mid 60s, I had a column in the Reno newspaper, and it was it gave me a few bucks, and I made, it was good money and for me. And I wrote a column once a week, and it was called Beyond the Mountains. And I wrote whatever I wanted, and then I wrote a column that ended my relationship. And the column was about, what's his name? I'm spacing his name right now, but he was the San Jose State professor who's responsible for the most famous sports photo of the 20th century. Do you know what that photo is?
No.
That's the photo of the boys on the podium at the Olympics in 1968, And I'm spacing his name, but this was before those Olympics, and I wrote a column about him, and he was trying to, it was called Ophir Olympic Project for Human Rights, and he wanted to get Avery Brundage fired, first of all, and he wanted black athletes to be recognized, and so those two guys from San Jose State took first and second in the Olympic, what was the 440, I think, and they stood on the podium and did that. But the newspaper would not print that. And the editor was an old friend of mine, and who's in night driving, by the way. And he's the one who we're driving and throwing beer cans out the window. But he wouldn't print it, and he said, this is a good article, it's well written, but Reno isn't ready to hear this. In other words, that Black Lives Matter. And so I ended my relationship with the newspaper, and so.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about what he stood against, or and even I think Carl Schranz fits into this. I mean, this whole controversy.
Okay, well, I first encountered Avery Brundage in this manner. When I was about 15, I had an aunt who, if you don't know about her, you should look her up. Her name is Marcy Herz, Herz. And Marcy skied in Sun Valley in the 30s and actually was a skier in the Sonia Henne movie, For Sonia. And she was Nevada champion skier, which as a young kid, my aunt was, and she was one of my favorite relatives. And she started the largest junior ski program in the country in Reno. And there's a school there named for her. Anyway, Marcy started this junior ski program. So on weekends, I would go up, and I was 14, 15, and I would teach these kids for 2 or 3 hours on Saturdays. I teach young kids how to ski. It was really a good thing, and I think they paid me $10 or something for 3 hours. You know, it was, you know, in those days, $10 was a nice little thing. And Avery Brundage got wind of it, and they had to quit. They had to fire us because I couldn't accept money for. So I couldn't teach in the junior ski program anymore.
And that was because you'd lose your, can you just tell us that you would lose your amateur?
Well, it was against the rules, and somehow Brundage found out that I wasn't the only one. There were others too being paid that were, but I was kind of a ski racer where I had something to lose by, you know, by becoming a professional, $10 a week. And so I disliked him because of that from a young age before I knew who he was. But the more I ever learned about the man, the more I disliked him and disrespected what he stood for. And what he stood for was white male privilege, period. And going back to Jim Thorpe and, you know, on and on and on. And so I was quite happy when he finally got exited. And he's responsible for what happened to Karl Schranz, and which was too bad, because Schranz is one of the great ski racers of history, and Avery screwed him over. And so eventually that got totally turned over in this country because of Spider Savage. and
So that you wouldn't be kicked out of racing because you were a professional versus...
Yeah, I mean, I was racing. I knew racing is what I wanted to do, and I couldn't allow that to happen. So I never liked him.
Now, as you're looking back, who are some of the mentors? I know that you can talk a little bit about Emil.
Yeah, Emil was, when I was a young kid living at South Shore, Tahoe, there were some skiers around there. Warren Hart was one, Jerry Wetzel, and Ron Peretti, I mean, and Martino Rose. I mean, I knew some people who were skiers, and I really liked them, and they were good. Dick Munn. And so then they opened Squaw Valley in Thanksgiving of '49, I think. Yeah, Squaw Valley opened. And so that was the first chairlift I ever rode. So we went over to Squaw Valley, me and my buddy John Robinson, and we got on the chair and we're hanging on and go, whoa, this is scary. But anyway, I had my idea of what a good skier was from these other guys, and they were good skiers. And while I was at Squaw, I was, 13 years old, 12 years old, I saw Emile Allais, and it truly blew my mind, because all of a sudden skiing, I saw skiing at a level that I'd never seen before, and that changed my life. Just seeing him as a young boy, I went, wow, here's something beyond what I had thought possible. Yeah.
Can you tell us the story of his connection with
Thank you.
with Sun Valley, that Alex Cushing
Well, yeah, and the year before that, before I first saw him, Alex Cushing was an East Coast aristocrat, as was Averell Harriman, so they had connections. And Cushing wanted to hire Emile to run the ski school at Squaw, which he did the first year. But Emile wanted out of Europe, and he wanted a job for the year before Squaw was going to open. So Cushing arranged with Harriman to bring Emile to Sun Valley to be on the ski school, which was, should have been one of the greatest assets in Sun Valley history.
I think if you pick it up with just saying that Emile should have been the great asset here.
Yeah, I mean, Emile Allais was still the greatest skier in the world at the time. He'd been world champion in '38, I think, and he could still ski. And so he was here, and the ski school took him on. But at that time, which in 1949 was not long after World War II, and the ski school here was full of Austrians and Germans, and it was run by Austrians and Germans, and they weren't happy with the French, and they weren't happy with one of the great famous French resistance fighters, which Emile was. And so they took the best skier in the world and put him over on Dollar Mountain teaching beginners. And Emile went over there, and I'm sure he changed the lives of a lot of beginner skiers. He did a good job. And he never whined about it or anything. And then one day, Emile left Dollar on his lunch hour and took the bus from Dollar over to Baldy and rode the lift up and skied down to the top of Exhibition and waited until the ski lift had a whole bunch of Austrian ski instructors riding up the lift, and he shushed Exhibition, which had never been shushed, not even remotely close, and went back to Dollar and taught skiing for the rest of the winter. And that's the kind of person Emile was, and his point had been made. And I love that story.
The state of mind of an Austrian ski school, and then talk about Siggy and stuff.
Okay. Well, the Austrians were here, and they have family ties, and they have cultural ties, and they're from Austria and Germany, and they're here, and here's this French resistance fighter who knows, he might have killed some of their friends and relatives, I don't know, but so they had a dynamic there that was not comfortable, and they treated Emile, to take that kind of skier and put him over on Dollar teaching beginners. But on the other hand, those same people took Jeanette Burr-Bray, and she taught beginners on Dollar as well. And she was one of the great American skiers, and she could outski most of the men in the valley. So that's that mindset, it's against.
Well, what was your relationship like with Siggy?
Siggy Engel, my first encounters with him, where I knew him and I saw him around, but we were never friends or sat and talked or anything. But my first encounter with him is that when I was here in 1963, and Funk and I put together the Diamond Sun race. You know what the Diamond Sun is? You don't? Okay.
No.
The Diamond Sun race is probably the fastest standard ski race in history anywhere in the world. And the starting gate is right by the ski patrol hut on top of the mountain. And the finish gate is right about where the bear is in front of the River Run Lodge. And you go down Ridge, Rock Garden, Canyon, Lower River Run there, any way you want to get there. And it's one of the famous races here in Sun Valley, it's the fastest. And it had only been run 5 or 6 times in history. And it hadn't been run in several years when Funk and I wanted to run it. And so we were trying to get it organized. And Siggy blocked it. But fortunately, Walter Hofstetter, who was a Swiss guy, Walter was mountain manager, and he okayed it. So we had and the mountain was in good shape for running it. And but what Siggy did is that we had just me and Funk and Betty Bell and Tammy Dix were going to run it. And he said, well, you have to have at least 5 people running it, so we got some other guy to run it too. And then he dropped the qualification time down, like 30 or 40 seconds. You had to be a certain time. And he dropped that down. And so we went up there and we ran it. And I set the record that still stands because it's never been run since, you know. And Funk got one, and Tammy got one. Betty didn't get in the qualifying time, but Funk and Tammy and I, and Tammy still comes here once a year. We see each other once a year. And my time, it's 2 3/5 miles, and my time is 2:21. So I was probably going 80 miles an hour coming out of Canyon. Yeah, and I was able to do that, coincidentally, because Jack Reddish happened to be here, and Jack was a friend, and he went down the course with me the day before the race, and gave me invaluable advice about what to do and what not to do. And Jack really made it for me, and he was a friend for life. He was a good one.
So was that why do you think Siggy, was he just trying to protect bystanders, or? No,
he was trying to protect the fact that he knew we would beat the old records, and he had a Diamond Sun, I think, and a bunch of other Austrians did. No, he was, and to give you an example, Siggy was an Austrian, and for him, Austrian skiing was the kind of the birthplace of American skiing, and Europeans were better skiers. That's all there was to it. And so I still remember when, can't remember what year it was, when Jimmy Huga finally won, what did he win, the Albert Kandahar? He won one of the big European races. I think it was the Kandahar. He won the combined or the slalom or something.
Combined.
He won the combined. And Siggy got up in front of the ski school and said, well, an American has finally won a race. You know. And, you know, he was always, he believed, and I think he truly believed it, he believed that European skiers, not just Austrians, but European skiers were superior to American skiers. And as they started to come up and disprove that illusion, he didn't buy it.
How would you characterize him versus Sepp? I mean, you can characterize Sepp.
Sepp had compassion and care, and he was an Austrian, but he cared about other people, and he knew other people mattered. Siggy didn't. That's how I'd characterize him. He cared about other people, and Siggy did not, in my mind. Yeah.
So this was the early 60s that you really...
Yeah. 63. Yeah.
And were you in Sun Valley in those days, or?
Yeah, I first came in 53, but I first lived here in 63. And Ned Bell, Betty Bell's husband, always set me up with a job, and I was the pizza cook and the bartender in what was called the Holiday Hut, which is where they wanted the employees not to hang around the bars. So I kind of ran that. And I got some money, pretty good money, got room and board. And my roommate at that time was Bobby Burns. And we were about as different as you could get, but we're lifelong friends. We're still good friends. And I'm the one who nominated him for the Hall of Fame. That's why he's in there. And but anyway, I got time off to train and to race, and Ned set it up every year, so I was set. And that was '63, the first year I came here. Yeah.
What'd you think of Bobby's skis? Right, and were you ever affiliated with K2?
No, I was never affiliated with K2. Bobby's skiing and skis changed the world of skiing, and he was a genius at what he did. Yeah, Bobby Burns, one of the great people in American skiing. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, what did he do?
What did he do? He invented free skiing, for starters, and then he invented the ski for free skiers, so that those boys who like to go out there and bounce around in the bumps had a ski that worked for them, and then he made them. That's quite a bit. I mean, it's not my world. I never got into that kind of skiing, but he did, and he did it better than anyone. Yeah.
Well, that really, that's what I've got. Have you any other questions you'd like to
The
ask?
story about the ski you told us yesterday, the one that was bouncing. Remember the material of the skis? I think
Okay.
that's also
Yeah,
very
okay.
Interesting.
So after we went to Chile to do the speed runs, and head skis gave us some ski. Well, we had our regular downhill head skis, which is what I used to race on in those days. And we set the speed record on 220 head downhill skis, or I did. C.B. Vaughn was on another ski. I forget what ski he was on. And so when we came back from that, I don't remember all of the details, but the next year I wound up skiing for Kneissl, because Kneisl's brother-in-law, Saska, was the U.S. importer for Kneissl, and so I was a Kneissl guy. So then when I went to Europe to speed ski, I was on Kneissls, and after I fell down in the speed runs and got hurt and all of that, I went to Kufstein, where Kneissl was made, and Kneissl kept really good care of me. He gave me a job after I kind of recovered from my leg thing. But in his office one day I was talking to him, and he said, "I'll show you something," and he took a head ski that he had, and he picked it up by the tail and he hit it across a table, and so the tip of the ski just went like this, and then it stopped, because metal does that. Metal vibrates. And then he took a Kneissl White Star, hit it over the table, and it went, doesn't vibrate because of the materials. And Franz's brother, whose name I can't remember, was the genius ski maker. He knew all this material and stuff. He was a real kind of introverted, weird guy, but that was his thing. And he's the guy who invented plastic skis and stuff and did that. Because before that they were all metal and wood. And he invented that, and Franz was the PR guy, salesman. He's the guy who promoted him. Yeah, he was good.
And they built special skis for you, right?
Oh yes, and then since I was there, I worked in the factory that winter before I went back and ski raced, and then they built special skis for me, and I tried a whole bunch of different lengths of skis in styles and everything, and I found one that worked best for me. It was a 240 speed ski, and he also gave me his coach, which was a guy named Egon Schiff, who was third best downhiller in the world in 1950 in the FIS. He was a great Austrian ski racer, and Egon came with me and was invaluable in Cervinia with the speed ski races. Yeah, so Kneissl was really good to me. Yeah, and for me.
I just wanted to know, but you
Go ahead.
tell it, Rick. What is skiing for you? What does it mean for you?
Skiing has always meant freedom to me. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, freedom has always meant skiing to me.
Okay, good.
Skiing has always meant freedom to me, and it's a form of meditation. I mean, I go out and ski now, and it's like, I'm in the present moment, and I'm fond of saying it's the most fun you can have in the upright position. So, I love to ski. I always have.
If you pick it up again with Yvonne made pitons.
Oh, okay.
Rolling.
Okay. Well, Yvon Chouinard made pitons and ice axes and ice hammers, and he was the best in the country for climbers equipment, and he was really good. And he was a blacksmith. He made it all himself. He was really good. And Doug Tompkins, who built North Face and Esprit, was a businessman, and he knew things, and he told Yvon that, you buy a piton and it lasts you for years. You buy a pair of crampons and they last for years. And you buy a hammer, they last for years. But if you buy a shirt, you want a new one next year. So he convinced Yvon to go into the clothing business, and that's where Patagonia came from. Yeah, and then they named it after our trip to South America. But Doug influenced Yvon enormously. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what Doug did.
Doug, he built North Face, and when he sold that, he got the money that we used to do our trip to South America. And then while he was gone, his wife started making clothes and was quite successful. So in designing clothes, and Doug was a businessman, so they built what became Esprit. It started out being called Sweet Baby Jane, and then it became Plain Jane. And anyway, so he made lots of money. And years later, after he and his first wife were divorced, and he wound up with, I don't remember the exact sum, but when he got out of Esprit, he had something like $200 million or something. And so he had spent a lot of time in South America, and we'd skied down there and done all these things. So he, by that time, had been very influenced by Arne Ness. So he decided to start buying up land in Chile and putting it aside to save it so that they wouldn't log it and build mines where they shouldn't and do all the stuff that is damaging the world, the physical world, the environment. And so he went down, and then he later married Chris McDivitt, who used to run Patagonia for Yvon. And she and Doug built the largest environmental group on Earth in Chile and Argentina mostly. And they've bought up millions of acres, and you can't develop them, period. And they've set it up so that Argentina and Chile Chile's governments have both backed it. And so they're probably the most effective environmentalist in the history of Earth. Yeah, yeah. So they're great. And
one more question.
yeah.
Sun Valley, hotspot for the rich and
Yes.
wealthy, beautiful.
Yes.
Who did you go skiing with? So when you were a ski instructor here, right?
Oh.
As you told us.
When
just a little bit for the.
Okay. Yeah, when I was a
audience.
ski instructor here, I had a great ride. Let's see, the first ride that was really famous is I spent 2 weeks with Barbara Streisand. And the ski school gave me Barbara, and she's one of my all-time heroes. She's a wonderful human being. She's also can act and sing and everything, but she's really an amazing human being. And I had an old beater car. I can't remember what it was, but it was really beat up, and I didn't have much money and everything. And I used to drive up here to the lodge, to the front of the lodge, to pick her up. And the first time I showed up, the doorman went, "What is this old junker doing here?" And I went in and got Barbara Streisand. So every day I'd pick her up here, and we'd go ski all day. And we had so much fun. She's one of my all-time heroes. And in those days, life was a little different in Sun Valley, and so every day we'd go have lunch somewhere. And I was still drinking in those days, and so I would always have hot wine with lunch. That's what I liked, you know. And so she'd do whatever, and we'd go skiing. So one day we went out. She was dating this guy named Richard Baskin, and he has a house out on Warm Springs. And so at one point she said, "I want to learn how to cross-country ski." So we got skis and we went out to Baskin's place. I built a track and we went out and cross-country skied, and she really liked it and had a good time. And we came in for lunch at Baskin's house, and she said, "Well, you know that hot wine that you drink? Could we make some of that? We know." I said, "Sure," you know. And so I can't even remember the recipe now, but it's really easy to make. But she brought out like a $500 bottle of wine, so we had hot wine with lunch. And but she's a wonderful human being. And then the other great experience I had here is I had I can't remember how many days, 4 or 5 days with Ted Kennedy. And that was fantastic because he, as you can imagine, he attracts people, you know. And so as a ski instructor, you're allowed, I think, 3 or 4 people in your class in the lift lines. But Kennedy would just pick up people, you know. And so I'd cruise into the ski school lines with 10, 12 people, you know, and I'd go, "You got to cut me some slack here," and we'd all go up. And so I spent that time with him, and his sister Jean Smith was my favorite. She was a really special woman. I really liked her. And Ted Jr. was with us with his one leg, and he skied, and that was really good. And then I had this one experience, and I've written about it. You've probably read about it. We were up in Roundhouse, and Ted wanted to leave, and I was going to ski with the rest of the people, but he said, "Would you ski me down?" And I said, "Sure." So we skied down Olympic, and we got down about, you know, less than 100 yards from where Olympic runs into River Run. And he was following me, and he fell down. And I was, I don't know, 30 feet below him or something. And I stopped, and he's laying there, and all of a sudden I could see he's breathing like, I mean, he's breathing. I'm going, "Oh, man." And I went up to him and I said, "You okay?" He said, "You know, he's not okay." And I had this thought, and I'm ashamed of the thought, but I'm looking at him and I thought he was having a heart attack and he might die. And you know, my first thought should have been, how can I get help? What can I do? And my first thought was, don't you fucking dare die on me. I'm not going to be present at one of the Kennedys' deaths. But I had that thought, and I went, oh my. But he got up and we got him down, and I got him to the bus and he went back to the lodge. And then the next week he was checked into the hospital and he had some serious, you know. But I always remember that and thinking, my first thought was, don't you dare die on me.